making sure that Ukraine gets as many artillery shells as necessary and has this prevalence over Russia is crucial to winning this war. I mean, the F-16 are great, but in sheer numbers and mass, artillery really will decide the outcome on the ground.
We've been discussing, Sir Keir Starmer's been meeting President Biden in the White House tonight. Earlier, he met President Zelensky at that NATO summit and promised the Ukrainian leader that the change of government here in the UK would make no difference to Britain's support for Ukraine. The Prime Minister said Britain will also now allow Ukraine to use its Storm Shadow missiles to strike within Russia, something that was met with thanks by Volodymyr Zelensky. Earlier, I spoke to Sergiy Petukhov, a former Deputy Minister of Justice for Ukraine and lecturer in international law, and he told me the importance of that meeting between President Zelensky and the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Reconfirming that the policy of UK does not change with the change of government is something that is important over here, specifically the signal that Ukraine can use the British-provided weapons as it chooses to, including the Russian territory, something that has been debated in some other countries.
The Prime Minister also offered his condolences for that terrible attack, a series of attacks, including the terrible strike on a children's hospital. That does really underline the threats, the dangers and the continuing onslaught from Russian forces in your country, doesn't it? And the urgent need for more supplies.
Absolutely. And I mean, 2 days ago, Russia shot more than 40 of its ballistic missiles all over Ukraine, specifically targeting 2 hospitals in Kiev, which is definitely not a coincidence. It's a way of sending a message to both Ukraine and the world that we will continue terrorizing Ukrainians until they capitulate, which I think is not going to happen. And as a result of it, today, President Biden committed to sending 5 more of the strategic air defense systems, which is great news. But I think all of Ukrainians wanted this to happen before those deadly attacks, not after them. So I think that the Putin will not stop unless he sees a very clear and strong signal from all of our Western allies, and it should come in a timely manner before he decides to do another of its terrorist attacks against the Ukrainian population.
Yes, and of course, that is very much the focus of this NATO meeting underway in Washington. We've already had a further commitment of F-16 fighters from the US, Denmark and the Netherlands. What are the other specific things which Ukraine really needs from its NATO partners?
Quite specifically, the artillery shells. Surprisingly, North Korea, almost the only Russian ally, managed to provide more of the artillery shells than the whole collective West so far. So unfortunately, the defense production in the Western countries has been on decline for decades and is being restarted fairly slow. So making sure that Ukraine gets as many artillery shells as necessary and has this prevalence over Russia is crucial to winning this war. I mean, the F-16 are great, but in sheer numbers and mass, artillery really will decide the outcome on the ground. So I think this is something that is still lagging behind. The Western production is still slower picking up than the production in both Russia and North Korea. And this is why Russia still has prevalence and is able to push through Ukrainian positions by overwhelming the Ukrainian artillery systems.
President Biden has again stressed the US commitment to Ukraine and how he wants to lead NATO in resolving to continuing that commitment. But of course, this summit has been somewhat overshadowed by the questions over his health, his ability to continue, whether he should pull out of the presidential race. How concerned are you in Ukraine about the possibility of President Trump returning to the White House, given what he has said about NATO and indeed what he said about somehow solving the entire war in one day if he is returned to the White House?
Well, we're definitely following closer here in Ukraine what Trump says during his campaign. And we also realize that campaign is different from being in the office. And when Trump was the president, he did not really follow the Putin's agenda. And even, after the first meetings, I think he realized that you can't play friends with Putin. You have to show him the strong hand. And we pretty much rely on the bipartisan consensus in Congress, where both Democrats and Republicans believe that only by supporting Ukraine and making sure that Ukraine wins this war, the American interests in Europe are well protected and Europe will feel secure. So hopefully, whoever comes after the elections to the White House, the policy will not change significantly, and Ukraine will remain in the focus of U.S. administration.
And we know that President Zelensky is also meeting US lawmakers in Washington. I mean, you talk about the support in Congress and in the Senate, but I mean, that's not universal, is it? We saw those long delays before the last big phase of support was finally agreed. Are you worried that particularly some leading Republicans, there are real doubts about whether they should continue to be providing so much support to your country?
We're definitely not taking the U.S. support for granted. There's a lot of interaction involved with both White House and support and assistance is put to well use. And I think this is exactly the task of Ukrainian administration, to explain those points and provide information that is necessary for the decision making. So I think not only President Zelensky, but also our members of parliament, politicians and representatives of the civil society take a lot of time in explaining to our American counterparts and friends on why is that crucial, how that serves American interests, how that makes America more secure, and how that helps Ukraine defend its independence, democracy, and protect its population. So I think this is something that is continuously happening and will be happening no matter who wins the next elections.
And Sir Keir Starmer, this is a first big outing on the world stage, his chance to get to know other world leaders. But he does come with the added clout of having just won a whopping great majority here in the UK. Are you still really looking to him, not just to continue Britain's support, but also to galvanise in particular other European nations not to waver in their support for Ukraine?
I'm sure Mr. Starmer is well informed on the situation in Ukraine. I know that he's been meeting our lawmakers, our civil society leaders before this important win of his party. So I'm sure that he has a good understanding on what's going on. And I'm sure that he will continue the UK leadership, which, again, I think we're blessed by the fact that no matter who is currently in the government, the UK as a whole, on all of its political spectrum, is supporting Ukraine. So I think this is something that we don't see that often in many other European countries. And here, UK can show the leadership and provide example in terms of both the economic support, political support, enforcement of sanctions, which is very important. UK has its own sanctions list, different from the European EU sanctions list. So I think these are the areas where UK can provide the leadership and lead by example.
Sergiy Petukhov, former Ukrainian Justice Minister, speaking to me just a little earlier this evening.